Hello and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for today, Tuesday, September 15th, 2020. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. Today, I have the very great pleasure of having my friend, Editor-in-Chief of The Duran, Alexander Mercouris, on the line today. We're going to chat Brexit. We're going to chat Nordstream 2. We're going to chat the election. We're going to do what we always do. We're going to talk politics. Alexander's a great wealth of information and a keen political mind, and I'm looking forward to this. We've done this a couple of times before. You can check the archives of this podcast, episodes, I think, 26 and 16, where Alex has been on earlier, for future reference. So, Alex, good morning or good afternoon, because I know you're over in London. So, good morning, and how are you today?
I am very well, and it's good afternoon here, and it's a beautiful day, and I'm delighted to be on this program with you again, Tom. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. It's not a good day over here. We've got Hurricane Sally, I think, out in the coast, out in the Gulf, creating all sorts of havoc. It's so I hope I don't lose power this morning. That would be bad. So that happened to me actually on Saturday morning. I was trying to record a podcast for an interview with somebody else, and 20 minutes before it was due, I was like, I have no power. I don't know when it's coming back. So it's I live in the lightning capital of the world. I'm not surprised, right? So, all right, Alex, let's. It's been a very interesting couple of weeks, and I think the best term for the period that we're living through is the acceleration, right? Everything is continuing to accelerate. We've got the World Economic Forum, what I call the Davos crowd, pushing their Great Reset. Another example of that is this morning, Bill Gates comes out and slams the FDA over their handling of the COVID vaccine because he's, a Malthusian eugenicist who wants to literally destroy most of humanity because he can't see any other way. We've got so many things happening, and they're all tied up around the major issues that are all coming to a head right around this fourth quarter of 2020. We've got Brexit. We've got U.S.-Russian relations, including all of the wrangling around who's going to control energy into Europe over the course of the next century. And then, of course, we have the election itself. I think all these things are tied together. So let's start with what's going on in Brexit, because I'm sure that you have a far more nuanced look at what Boris Johnson's latest strategies are with the internal markets bill and how he's going to attack the EU's and the bad faith negotiating strategies, the way I read it. So let's start there.
Well, I think you've hit the right note right from the start when you talk about the EU's bad faith negotiating strategy, because of course that is exactly where we are, and that is exactly what explains what is happening at the moment in Britain. Now, can I just talk about the general issues, of course, in Britain, which is one of the most extraordinary things, is that we had a referendum which people decided to vote for Brexit in 2016, and then we had a massive battle to get even that done, even a exit from the political structures of the EU done, and that seemed to have been concluded with the December election, the election we had in December when the pro-Brexit Conservatives, or at least so they seemed, led by Boris Johnson, won a convincing victory. And then what has happened is that as soon as that battle seemed to be over, and it seemed as if Brexit was definitely going to happen, it turned out that, in fact, those who basically oppose Brexit in Britain are still not reconciled to that decision, are still looking for ways basically either to draw back from it or to sabotage it or to throw it off course in some way. They're still manoeuvring to try to keep Britain in an absolutely, when I say close relationship with the EU, I think it's a misunderstanding. I mean, that's what they say, but it's basically a subservient relationship to the EU. And it's also remarkable to see how the EU itself has learned absolutely nothing from the failure of its strategy up to now, which basically involves allying itself with pro-Remain elements within the House of Commons to try to force the British government basically to call off the whole thing, or at least to backtrack on it in significant ways. They've gone back to that strategy, and that's why we are in the crisis that we are in. Now, I say a crisis, but the other thing that's become extraordinarily interesting is that British public opinion on this subject has not shifted at all. It remains as entrenched as always. The British voted for Brexit in 2016. They voted for pro-Brexit parties, or parties that said they would carry out Brexit, in 2017. They voted even more convincingly for parties that said they would carry out Brexit in 2019. And every opinion poll suggests that they feel exactly the same way about it now, and that it remains the most important central issue in British politics still. More important than the coronavirus crisis, which astonishes me, more important even than the economic recession that we're in. The focus for most people in Britain remains Brexit. It remains the big dividing line, and it is the reason why, by the way, contrary to all expectations and predictions, the Conservative Party's poll ratings remain strong. So can we just discuss briefly where we are? Going back to your point about bad faith, there was a withdrawal agreement last year, which Boris Johnson sorted out at great speed in order to get Britain out of the EU as quickly as possible. That involved certain concessions to the EU about trade arrangements with Northern Ireland. Those were all based on the assumption that there would be a trade agreement sorted out this year and that the EU would negotiate in good faith. The EU is not negotiating in good faith. In fact, it is not negotiating at all. It has done what it has consistently done. It has pocketed the concessions made in the withdrawal agreement, and it is now trying to use those concessions in order to gain leverage over the British government, to force the British government into making a further concessions on a whole swathe of subjects such as state aid, fisheries, but ultimately the whole question of the EU keeping control of large sections of the British economy. What is now happening is that Boris Johnson, who is a very different personality from Theresa May, and who understands that what is sustaining the Conservative government's popularity is its promise to get Brexit done. What has changed is that Boris Johnson seems to be prepared to call that bluff, and he is saying, if you do not negotiate with me in good faith, I will go back on the concessions I made in the withdrawal agreement, because those concessions were made on the presumption that you would negotiate with me in good faith. And that's the nature of, that's basically what the bill he's put together says. And as night follows day, and with the precision and predictability of a Swiss watch, what we see is that the Remainers have created a huge uproar around this. They're saying Britain never breaks international law, which is, of course, nonsense, and that Boris Johnson is a rogue prime minister who is doing something that was completely unthinkable and has never been done before, when in fact, of course, it has been done many times. So that's where we are. We have an artificial row, a concocted row in Britain on the question of the government breaking international law, which is a complete nonsense. We have the European Union again negotiating in bad faith and trying to leverage the British government into making concessions it does not want to make. We see a British government that this time is prepared to call that bluff, but we also find that there are powerful Remainer voices, and to be very clear, they are Remainer voices still in the House of Commons, including in the Conservative Party, who remain fundamentally unreconciled to what is happening. So that, in a nutshell, in my opinion, is the situation.
Yeah, and it seems to me, and that's a great summation of what's happening. So where we go from here, I think, is very interesting, because I saw something this morning, again, that, what the same person that helped push through a final withdrawal agreement back in October of last year, which is French President Emmanuel Macron, now looks like he's going to step in again now that Johnson has taken the step. And Johnson's right to take this step, and he absolutely has to do what he's doing here, because it's very clear and he's made this point himself, saying, I'm not going to let you sit around and carve up the United Kingdom, because it's very obvious that separatists in Scotland and Wales and others, that they're looking for, well, if we can do this to Northern Ireland and carve that off by creating a hard border across the Irish Sea between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which is it's the chutzpah is the best word for this, of the European Union at this point, is staggering. But that the Scots also thought that they were going to be able to pull the same thing. Or they're going to put themselves in regulatory alignment with the EU, within the Confederation of the UK, and force England into submission again, even further. And then eventually they would just push for an independence referendum. And I think it's also, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's my understanding or my interpretation of events that the Scottish National Party is the dominant party in Scotland, not because they're so pro-EU and so ungodly socialist, but because, which they are, but because people in Scotland actually still want independence from England. Yeah. And that I think Nicola Sturgeon and Ian Blackford, the head of the Scottish National Party in Parliament, were both going to be very, very surprised that if they get their independence referendum, the people of Scotland aren't going to immediately flip and want to become, change one tyrant in Westminster for another one in Brussels. I just don't see that happening. Now, correct me, I may be wrong about that, but it just, once people get a little bit of, it's like what's happening in Britain. Once they've gotten past the psychological hurdle of throwing off the chains of one tyrant. And that's the way the EU looks now. As you rightly pointed out, we have years of the British people refusing to budge on their opinion about what to do about Brexit. That strategy to scare them into submission has failed completely, which is a theme we'll come back to over and over again this morning. That the same thing's going to could happen in Scotland if they even get their independence referendum. Now, personally, I also think, and again, something else for you to consider, is I think that the Internal Markets Bill is also a way for the British government, for Boris Johnson's government, to try and pull back on the reins of Scottish independence by saying, look, we're going to defend Northern Ireland. We're also willing to defend Scotland.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. No question about that at all. This is definitely one of the major issues. I mean, I'll say this straight away. I mean, a government in London can survive the loss of Northern Ireland. I mean, I'm not suggesting that's what they want to see happen. On the contrary, there will be great anguish about it. But, there would still be a very strong British core remaining. But the loss of Scotland, which contains about 45% of British national territory, even though it is a much smaller country population-wise, it's only got about 5 million people, would be a tremendous shock. That would be for the London government a trauma that it's difficult to imagine how it would, see it through. So they do not want to see Scotland go. And I'm going to say something. I think that they also calculate, and I think absolutely rightly, that once Brexit happens, if Scotland doesn't secede soon, the chances are that the pendulum will start to swing in exactly the way you said, away from independence and back towards Scotland wanting to remain within the UK. Now, the thing to understand about the European Union is that it is basically a device for weakening sovereign states. Not all of them, but most of them. It certainly is a device for weakening Britain, for example, or Italy, or Spain. You see all these secessionist movements growing up there because people in these countries, in countries like places like Veneto or Catalonia or Scotland, are able to say, well, actually, we don't really need to be part of the United Kingdom. We can secede and indulge ourselves by, following through on our, romantic nationalist myths, because we're all part of the great EU single market. The major economic decisions are not made in our national capitals anymore. They're made in Brussels, so we don't really lose very much. Now, What happens if Britain leaves the EU is that this calculus rapidly starts to change. Scotland's major trade is not with Germany or Belgium or, the Czech Republic. It is with England or Hungary. It is overwhelmingly with England. If Britain is no longer in a single market, then Scotland is going to have to make a decision. Scottish voters are going to have to make a decision whether they really want to push themselves into a major economic crisis by cutting off economic links with the country that they are basically, economically speaking, a part of, or whether ultimately it makes far better sense for them economically and politically to remain in the United Kingdom, avoid those sort of disruptions, and return MPs to Westminster, where the big decisions affecting Scotland will continue to be made. So, the moment Britain leaves the EU, the attractions of Scottish independence falls. The SNP understands that very well. That's why I think they are very keen on the EU and why they're pushing so hard for a Scottish referendum, independence referendum now, because I think they realise that if they don't get it now, when all the momentum is still with them, then it's likely that it will never happen, that the prospects of it will recede. I think this is understood in Edinburgh by the SNP. I think it is fully understood in London by Boris Johnson and the people around him. And I think that that's, part of the battle that we're going to see being played out. You're absolutely right. There is no conceivable way that Johnson is going to make concessions over Northern Ireland when the issue of Scotland, which is so much more important, remains unresolved. So he is absolutely right. I have no doubt about this. He's absolutely right to stand his ground over this. I think that in the end, he will be able to call the bluff of his Remainer opponents within the Conservative Party and get his bill passed. I think a government with an 80-seat majority is unlikely to fail on such an important issue. If he does fail, he still has the option of, in that case, walking away at the end of the year and rejecting whatever proposals the EU makes. I think this is an important fact which people tend to overlook. But I also agree with you that the EU ultimately stands more to lose from the breakdown of these negotiations than Britain does. The situation in the EU is very bad. The coronavirus crisis has hit the EU economies exceptionally badly. There's the looming prospect of tariffs on German car exports to the United States. The Germans do not want to lose access for their car exports and other exports to the UK market. I think they need that at this time like a hole in the head. And I think what we will probably see is that over the next few weeks, especially if this bill passes and goes into law, the EU will start to change its tune and we will start to see negotiations taking a different course. And Macron is always there, hovering in the background. He's a very ambitious man. He doesn't want the British in the EU anyway, because he's a fervid integrationist, and the British have always acted as a brake on his integrationist agenda. But over and beyond that, there is now his rivalry with Angela Merkel and with the Germans over who leads the European Union. And I think he facilitated Johnson's bid to get Britain out of the political structures last year. And I think if push comes to shove, he will do the same with the economic structures this year. So everything to play for. I think Johnson is taking entirely the right decisions. It is easy to underestimate him. He comes across as disorganized and unfocused many times. He is not a particularly good administrator, but he does understand politics and the diplomatic game, and he does so better than anyone else in Britain that I know.
No, I agree, and I think it's interesting that one of the things I thought about when I was getting myself back up to speed on the Brexit issue, because I had put it on the back burner for months because it wasn't the dominant thing for me to worry about. It looked not settled, but I knew that later in the year it would become important again, and here it is cropping back up. So as I was getting back up to speed on this, I said part of I think Johnson's strategy, and this is where I sometimes I have to wonder what Nigel Farage is thinking or what his strategies, what strategically goes through his head, because he's done nothing but been a very one note about this is not Brexit, this withdrawal agreement's not good, yada yada yada. Now he's right in all those rights, but when you think back to October of last year or September, October of last year, they had this withdrawal agreement. It was a poison pill. It wasn't the best. There wasn't much Johnson could do with it if he needed to get something decided so that he could then move to the election. So you put together a bad act or a bad bill, sign it into law, but it has enough tripwires and enough out clauses in it, which the EU all signed off on. Yes. Right? Article. Now we're speaking specifically about Section 38 and the reasserting the sovereignty of Parliament and all this. And to me, I would not put it past Johnson and Dominic Cummings and the rest of them, who are at times too clever by half, to have thought so far ahead to the Scottish issue and the Scottish independence issue that if the EU attempts to use Northern Ireland to the way they have, that the next thing for them to do is to do exactly what they've done, and then therefore that would also. Because if you go back to a year ago, the Scots were openly like, if you do this, we're going to walk away. Yes. You can't stop us and everything else. Yes. And so there had to be a way to bring the Scots back into the fold. And the way you do that is by forcing the EU into a situation strategically. You force them into a situation where they use Northern Ireland as a leverage cudgel, and then explain to everybody that we're not sacrificing Northern Ireland, that we're not going to even honor the withdrawal agreement because the withdrawal, or we're going to amend it to make sure that it's British, that it's not Brino. And if we don't, and if the EU doesn't go for that, then we'll just negate it anyway, because no treaty under international law can undermine the sovereignty of a country. And this is like one of the first precepts of international law.
Correct.
Johnson holds all the cards here. The EU's holding 2-7 offsuit. He's holding aces, and he just flopped a set. Like, what are you guys going to do? You're not going to, from a poker perspective or whatever. I'm not a chess player, so I can't talk that way. But I am a poker player, and I do know poker. I do know a good poker hand from a bad one. And the EU has a terrible hand, and they've always negotiated with traitors to the British, in the or to the other sovereign nations, because they have people. They have people stationed within the governments themselves, working on their behalf to undermine them. And they have the media on their side, and they have the oligarch class on their side, and the rest of it. So it also says to me that, and in the process of doing all this, they also were able to get rid of Sir Mark Sedwill, which is an incredibly important bit of thing, piece of kit, political kit, to use a British phrase, that had to be taken care of as well, because that man was absolute poison and far too powerful. So
far too powerful. He was both cabinet secretary, and he was in effect the controller of the British security state, which had two roles which have always been kept separate in the past, but which were combined in him. And he's known to have exercised enormous influence over Theresa May. And can I say, we've only got into this mess with Ireland, with Northern Ireland, because of concessions that Theresa May made. She agreed to this disastrous Irish backstop idea, and brought Ireland into the equation. And of course, what has happened is that Johnson had to untie that knot fast last year, and he did it. And I think that he never really expected that the whole thing would stick and would hold together, because he never really intended to give up Ireland, and he certainly didn't intend to give up Scotland. And I'm absolutely right, by the way. I'm quite sure that Johnson and Cummings and the others, who are not fools, were thinking about Scotland last year as much as they are now. So I'm sure that they saw this ahead. And I think they understood that this withdrawal agreement was a device to get through the immediate problems that Theresa May and the Remainers had created, and they signed it off with every intention of, dropping these concessions that they'd been forced to make in a hurry, in very bad circumstances, as soon as they could. So you could say, if you wanted to do that, they acted in bad faith. But then so did the EU, because the EU was never using that withdrawal agreement as a real basis for a compromise. It was using those concessions to continue to press for more concessions, which is what the EU always does. I once remember being told by my father, who had dealings with EU officials when he was involved in the government of Greece, this is before the financial crisis, that negotiating with the EU was like putting money in a defective slot machine. You put your money in and nothing comes out. And that is exactly how it works. I mean, they don't really negotiate at all. They make maximalist demands, and then they intrigue with your opponents in your own country in order to put pressure on you to get you to concede to them. That's how they always function. Now, the problem is, I think Boris Johnson inherently does have an exceptionally strong set of cards, except, of course, he's got the weakness at home of having the very strong Remainers who are still very influential at various levels in British politics. And you're quite right, he's picked off Mark Sedwill. He picked off an awful lot of the arch Remainers in the Conservative Party, but they are still some of them there. And they are still capable of causing him trouble, and as has now become very clear over the last few days, he has one further immense advantage of a Labour Party that has become so deeply compromised by this issue that it is struggling to put together any kind of coherent response. The Labour Party took the crazy decision of appointing the arch Remainer in chief, Sir Keir Starmer, London MP and Knight of the Realm, to be their leader, which was exactly the kind of person that the working class people in the former Labour constituencies don't want under any circumstances at all. And I think Starmer realises that he has to win those people back. He has no clue how to do it. And in fact, being who he is, he cannot win them back. But the result is that he's smudging his own message, because he understands that if he now takes openly a very strong Remainer position, he will lose them completely and any prospect of Labour ever coming back to power again. So they have a very, very difficult position in the Labour Party. Boris Johnson's position is inherently much stronger.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, and there's an interesting parallel here. We'll shift gears, because I love talking about Boris Johnson as a proxy for Donald Trump, because they're similar, but they're in similar circumstances, but not necessarily similar people, right? I mean, they govern differently and yada yada yada. Trump is a good manager. He's just not particularly. Just doesn't have any organization to manage. Is his problem. Yeah. Johnson, on the other hand, is not a good manager, but has a massive bureaucracy that he doesn't, that functions, but he doesn't know how to control it. All right, cool. So what we have is a very similar set of circumstances for both men coming into these very important issues surrounding Brexit. Johnson solidifies his position as the prime minister that changes the course of Britain, right, with Brexit. And like the first reading of the bill, of the internal markets bill, passed with 77 votes. And the second reading, something similar with a huge majority. So while there's a couple of Tory MPs that are willing to, cross the line or defy the whip or however you guys want to put it, it's not enough to matter. And I think when we get down to the final reading of the bill, I don't think he may suffer an embarrassing win. He only wins by 15 or 20 or 30 votes, but it's still going to be a win and a win. And in this situation, a win is a win. Yeah. Same situation is happening but when he does that, as you just pointed out, he's going to kill labor.
Yes.
In the process.
Yes.
Okay. And with labor having no other option than to align themselves with the EU, because they have to take the oppositional stance. Johnson's the arch Brexiteer. They have to be the arch Remainers, and that's exactly where you want them to be. Yeah. You don't want them trying to play a game of, well, we can have kind of a Brexit or yada yada yada. No, they have to take the opposite situation. And this is the problem with two-party politics. Yeah. This is one of and sometimes, and generally speaking, this is one of those moments where the good guys actually have the advantage and now can put the bad guys for lack of a better term, put the bad guys on their back foot and force them into a position they don't want to be in. Same thing is happening in the United States. Donald Trump has the opportunity here, if he wins the election with a significant enough electoral college majority, to overwhelm any potential legal shenanigans and violent coup attempts that have obviously been planned against him. If he wins with a strong enough electoral college majority, all of that will fade by November 5th, interestingly enough, Guy Fawkes Day, and he will destroy what's left of the Democratic Party. They understand that this election is an existential threat to them, because then their internal divisions will overwhelm the party. The old guard will be gone. Pelosi will be just a sad old woman with dyed hair and bad dentures, and then that'll be that. And we'll be, and it'll be a very different world. And so that's what we're looking at. So,
I agree with that. I agree with that. First of all, can I just say Johnson and Trump are very different as personalities. Right. They do have some skills as politicians in common. Both of them have absolutely the ability to talk to people in ways that most British politicians no longer do, by the way. Johnson can work a crowd just as Trump in the United States can. Starmer, for example, can't work a crowd. It's just not what he does. He's not got that kind of political ability at all. So that's a fundamental difference. It's also true that the kind of people who oppose Trump and the kind of people who oppose Johnson are the same, and they use almost exactly the same language to oppose him. I remember about a year and a half ago going to Islington, which is a part of North London, which is very much the Remainer stronghold, if you like. It's got lots. Right. And I remember seeing all the shops and posters and things like that with all these cartoons of, he wasn't Prime Minister then, but of Johnson and other people who were on the Leave side. And I remember shaking my head and saying to myself, this is completely irrational. They're talking about these people in a way that is so crazy and so completely out of tune with reality. Talking about them as fascists, as Nazis, as oligarchs, as corrupt, all without any kind of foundation at all. I was just staggered by the hatred. And it's the same kind of hatred that you see from the same sort of people in the United States towards Donald Trump. So that is an important factor. Now, that hatred blinds those people to so many realities, and it leads them to make some, I think, utterly catastrophic decisions. Now, the Labour Party has a very rich tradition, historic tradition, of being opposed to the EU. It used to be the main opponent of the EU in Britain. It had strong support within working class communities. It has completely lost that, and it has become divorced entirely from the working class base which created it and without which it cannot win. It has now become, for all of these people, the party of the establishment and of the EU establishment, which is what, if you're a working class person in places like, Sunderland or Bradford, is exactly what you are opposed to. And bear in mind that the Conservatives plus this working class Labour, former Labour constituency have an overwhelming advantage that puts Labour in an existentially dangerous position. And it is the same with the Democrats in the United States. And I'm going to say something about this. I remember last year all these plots, all these intrigues, all these conspiracies that were going on in London. I remember the way that courts were used to declare illegal government decisions, which were obviously legal, like the prorogation of Parliament, for example. Right. I remember all the wire pulling, and there were talks, by the way, just as there are in the United States now, of Johnson being arrested and led off and sent to prison, and all sorts of hysterical things. And in the end, it completely backfired. It just consolidated support for Johnson because he was behaving like a sane human being and his opponents weren't. And I have to say, and I read all of these things going on in the United States. I read all about these plots and, we're not going to concede the result ever if Trump is to win. All these, the Red Mirage and Mattis talking to Coates and all these extraordinary things. I say to myself, these people have taken leave of their senses. They don't understand. They don't seem to understand what they're talking about. And I am sure that millions upon millions of people in the United States think in the same way as I do. I mean, you don't want to trust with power people who talk in this insane way and who are so hate-filled and so fanatical. And I am sure that just as it worked against the Labour Party and the Remainers in Britain last year, so it will in the United States come November. And I agree that once Britain is out of the EU, Labour is smashed, at least in any form that I can, anything that resembles its present form. I think the Democrats will be even more smashed in the United States if they lose. And it doesn't, I don't understand why they don't see this themselves, because it's, to me, obvious, completely obvious.
Alexander, power doesn't make you smart. Power makes you stupid and lazy. It makes you arrogant.
Yeah.
And they've had power and they've had the ability. People like Nancy Pelosi and Theresa May and Michelle Barnier is a better example than Theresa May. They've always worked, and I've said this many times, they've always operated in a playing field that's been tilted to their side. So they look like world beaters, and they can just like demand the moon and get it every time because they were always able to force some kind of concession, be it because they knew that they had 5 or 6 senators in Epstein's back pocket that they can count on their votes to, they own the Supreme Court. They own the Supreme Court justices, or they own this, or they own that. And they always knew that, like, when push came to shove, they were going to get what they wanted because they didn't have to actually negotiate because they weren't negotiating on a fair playing field. Now, when you see them actually having to operate against people who hold cards, you see how absolutely inept they are.
Yes.
And they don't know how to do anything else. They've spent their entire lives being positively rewarded for acting like, forget my French, jackasses.
Yes.
And then wondering why it doesn't work anymore. Like Yanis Varoufakis, you use the term the broken slot machine. Yanis Varoufakis very famously said that in negotiating it with the EU is they use the Swedish national anthem treatment. You make your case in front of them and they look at you when you're done and they go about their business like you just sung the Swedish national anthem. They don't even listen to you.
No.
Right? Because they fundamentally believe that they already own all the cards, so therefore they don't have to negotiate. They don't have to do anything because they have all these things. They've made all these things legal, and they don't realize just how much what they've actually done is annoy people to the point where they are the exact opposite of what people actually want. So when I look at what's happening in the United States, right, impromptu calls on Twitter by a woman in Cincinnati to say, hey, let's all get in our cars. I'm going to get up my car at noon and drive around the Beltway around Cincinnati during my lunch hour. And it turns into a 15-mile car pileup that shuts down I-275 around Cincinnati. Whereas the next day, there's Joe Biden out there speaking to literally 3 reporters and a camera, all cordoned off with circles around them, social distancing. And the media doesn't show anything other than the headshot of Biden. When then you pull back and I saw some of the shots and we're like, there's no enthusiasm for Biden. There are people who are radicalized against Trump, and sure, that's going to propel people in blue states to vote for Trump even more than they have before. But so what?
Yes.
That doesn't win you anything. You've got bigger problems now because you've now embraced the politics of destruction. You've embraced this idea that, well, you made a mistake in 2016.
Yes.
Do it again in 2020, and we're going to burn your house down.
It's entirely true. You're absolutely right, and it's the same in Britain. I mean, there is no enthusiasm for Starmer. I mean, Corbyn, who was, a radical socialist, there was genuine enthusiasm for him. I mean, there were people who were prepared to go out and knock on the doors and things like that. Of course, the people who didn't like him were the Labour Party, just as the people in the Democratic Party don't like genuine alternatives, like Tulsi Gabbard, for example.
Right.
So but nobody in Britain is enthusiastic for Keir Starmer. I mean, such a concept is completely alien. And the problem is, and I know people in the Labour Party. I was pointing this out. I was saying to them at the time. I've even written about this. I wrote a long piece for Consortium News about this. I said, he is absolutely the wrong person to have as your leader. You don't understand British politics. You don't understand the British people. But no, they insisted in their bloody minded way on having him because he was one of their own. And of course, what they do know how to do is engage in intrigues and wire pulling and all that. But then again, I've had this very same discussion with some of them. I said, don't you realize what a disastrous image that creates for you in the country? Even people who might be sympathetic to you on Brexit don't like intrigues when they're conducted in public in this way. You come across as dishonest and manipulative and deceitful, and people don't like dishonest, manipulative and deceitful people. But again, that didn't seem to have any effect because that's all these people know. And in the United States, it's the coin of the realm. And in the United States, they take it a stage further still because there is, frankly, a really unpleasant mafia type attitude to this. If you don't vote for us, your house will get burnt down. I mean, absolutely. Michael Corleone stuff. I mean, really awful stuff.
That's being driven by Obama. And don't kid yourself that I can see this as a keen observer of American politics. I can see the moment that impeachment failed and Trump tweeted out Obamagate. I'm like, uh-oh. He's just accelerated everything because now he's attacked Obama. Now he's effectively calling Obama a traitor and a criminal, and he's coming after him. That means that Obama then has to turn around and up the tempo. Like once you start down that path, forever will it dominate your destiny. But I mean, this is where we are, and I think Trump took that on willingly, knowing full well what their reaction would be. And I don't know that. Well, I don't know full well, but knowing that he had to do that in order to win the election, because he had to keep pounding this point home that these people were traitors, that they did things that were fundamentally un-American for power. And it wasn't just about me, even though Donald Trump is all about himself and he's a big narcissist and the rest of it. But he's been very smart in how he's communicated that this is a bigger issue than just that they spied on me. That they spied on a political opponent, and they used their power and the apparatus of government and the surveillance state, and all of which creeps normal Americans out in the first place.
Yes.
They use that for political advantage. And, okay, so what do we have after that? We have Obama, the doctrinaire Marxist, run the Marxist revolutionary playbook.
Yes.
And what has he done? He's alienated even more people. Now we've got normal left of center soccer moms in this country lining up 3 deep at local gun stores asking, whether I should buy a 1911 or snub nose 38. And these people were like, well, I don't even want to see a BB gun in my house. And now they're buying shotguns.
Yes.
Okay. You think, and then Joe Biden's telling them, hey, we're going to take all your guns if you elect me. Like, you got like 20 million new gun owners in America. I just saw this one, looked at the earnings report for Smith & Wesson, right? the other day, and the numbers were astonishing. They were off the charts. They were Apple-like. They reported their channel inventories. They were down 58 to 60% across all verticals within the company in Q1. Those numbers are going to be there in Q2 because then they turned around and declared a dividend. Like, yeah, we're so confident that this is not a fluke, that this is going to continue in perpetuity, and we're an American company that's now going to pay you 5 cents a quarter. Like, in our first time in our history, like Smith & Wesson has never given out a dividend, and if they have, it hasn't been in years, right? Like, this is, I don't even understand what they're doing at this point, other than they don't know how to do anything else. They have one playbook, and they're hoping that if they create a whole bunch of bad stuff, that they can blame it on Orange Man bad, and they can steal the election. And I'm here to tell you, Alexander, it's interesting. I was reading an article at Chronicles magazine yesterday. One of my regular viewers, readers, and whatnot. One of my regulars, great guy, sent this. He sends me stuff all the time. He sent me this article from Joseph Cotto, and who I'm going to be on with later in the week, about looking at some non-biased polling in the United States, and they've easily got Trump winning 320 in the Electoral College as of right now. He's up 3 to 5 points in every battleground state. And he's in, and he's going to win. He could easily win places like Maine, and he could easily be competitive in Oregon.
Yes,
New Mexico. Well, I mean, I'm looking at these numbers, and I'm like, and I'm looking at it going, there's no way. But this is about but again, this comes right back to the European Union and its fundamental dysfunction. And I keep saying this. I want you to comment on this because I don't know if you and I have talked about this before, but I fundamentally believe that this is being done. That if they can't win the election, that they will burn the United States to the ground as a political and economic entity, and say this is their scorched earth policy, and that no matter who wins this election, the people of the U.S. lose.
I don't know whether we've talked about it, but I have talked about it on the Duran because I completely agree with you. I mean, to some extent, it's probably based on much of your analysis, but you only have to listen to the way these people talk. That this whole way in which their discussion is framed is first, vote for us or we will burn the United States down. And it takes a very small step from that to, if you lose, actually burning the United States down. Because remember, a protection racket only works if it's real. If it's only a bluff, it fails. So, I think that is an absolutely terrifying language, by the way. I think that
it is.
So much of what I'm seeing and hearing in the United States is profoundly shocking to me. I must also tell you that I was really the effect it's having on the international image of the United States is horrifying to an extent that I think many Americans don't. Well, certainly many people, nobody in the Democratic Party seems to understand. But for the first time in my lifetime, people are worried about the US's political stability and its long-term future as an organized and functional state. And I've never known that before. I mean, there's been many times of political crisis in the United States. There have been bitter arguments and bitter divisions. There were the protests in the 60s. There was the Watergate. There was all kinds of things. But I've never known anybody seriously worry about whether or not the US could even hold together. And when people hear, and they do hear, I've heard about this, that people in the United States are stocking up with arms. Firstly, they are not surprised, given the pictures of mayhem and murder and violence in American cities. And bear in mind, of course, our TV stations, our big broadcasters don't show us those images. You won't see them on the BBC. But of course most people now get a lot of their news on social media, and to the even allowing for the fact that Facebook and Twitter and all the rest try to censor that as much as possible, it percolates and spreads about. And it is creating, as I said, a terrible crisis. And so that's one thing about how the world sees it. But of course it is, I'm sure, strengthening support for Donald Trump in the United States also. Now, I've had interactions with many Americans in my time. I've been to the United States. I'm not going to pretend that the people I know are necessarily representative of most Americans. I mean, for a British person, it'd be very difficult for that to be so.
Sure.
But the overwhelming impression I have always had is that Americans care about their constitution, believe in their system of government, and have a instinctive desire for law and order. It is a much more libertarian society than any society in Europe is. That is beyond dispute. Americans care about personal freedom to an extent that Europeans frankly don't. But I think, and of course they're also deeply patriotic. I mean, that is the other thing about Americans. I mean, Americans have a genuine and deep love for their country. Trashing all these things doesn't seem to me to be a clever way of winning an election. So this is yeah.
Image systems matter, Alexander, right? And I've said this all throughout the corona apocalypse, that now the good guys wear masks, and now we can't tell the good people from the bad. We can tell the good people the virtue signaling about COVID. Now, I'm not saying that COVID's not real or dangerous or any of those things. I've made my case on this. We've done this completely wrong. But what's important is that it also identifies now good people with Antifa and with BLM, as these are the good guys fighting for freedom in our black revolution. That's our color revolution is black. It's very clear, right? Yeah. And but on the other side of it, the bad guys don't. They're dirty spreaders. They are, they're not willing to get on board with the team. But here's the thing. It's also fundamentally, it's also just fundamentally against the grain of what our of how we. You're right in that we are very, very. It's not as much as patriotic as it is. We believe in that system. We still believe in that image, right? Of the image of America that Donald Trump runs on, this 1950s version of America, the shining house on the hill, which never really existed, but it's part of the mythology, and that mythology is dying, and maybe part of that mythology does need to die, and I'm not here to. We can have that conversation at a different day, but I think part of it, and I think a lot of people would argue that even good Americans would argue, oh yeah, some of this ideology needs to end. This mythology needs to end. It's perverse. But to the extent that they're taking it now and they're going to say, oh no, we're going to force you at gunpoint. No, that's not going to work. Look, Bill de Blasio is so thoroughly mismanaging New York that people are going to welcome the mob running the city again.
Yes.
That's where we are. Because at least the mob will bring a certain amount of order. I mean, it won't be good order, but it'll be order. What he's doing is truly vandal. It's vandalistic. He's a vandal, and so is. And I've always described Obama this way as well. Obama's not an ideologue; he's a vandal.
Yes.
Okay, and he's a traitor, and he needs to be he needs to be found and proven in court and removed from political life, and that would restore so much of what's happening, so much to the image of the United States, I think, because once you prove it, like this is what's going on, everybody knows it. Let's not kid ourselves. We all know what's happening. Anybody who's got 3 brain cells to rub together make a spark, who has any sense of political acumen, knows what this is about, and also knows that we're going to now shift right back to Europe. Why the European Union is going to collapse, because they're failing to remove Donald Trump. They're failing to stop Brexit. And now they've gotten themselves embroiled over this insane intelligence operation surrounding Alexei Navalny and Nordstream 2. And a story that you and I have both tried to cover in some semblance of linearity, and there is no linearity. There's just a Robert Altman film, right?
Yeah.
It's the best way to describe it. Just a whole bunch of different stories and everybody running around and using this thing as the catalyst for them to run their own agendas. And it's creating massive havoc. And I wonder, and I'm going to turn it over to you in a second. So I wonder, how does this thing lay out? How does everybody survive this when Nord Stream 2 is going to be completed and is going to be pumping gas into Germany in the next 60 to 90 days? So
well, the right thing for the Germans to do, as I've said this many times, is to draw back. And I mean, they've now got themselves into an impossible position where if they press forward and try to stop Nord Stream 2 at a time when the German economy and the European economy are in a mess, when there's tariffs against American cars coming, when a no-deal Brexit is looming on the horizon, when there's problems with China. I mean, Germany absolutely does not need a crisis with Russia that jeopardizes Nord Stream 2 at this time. I mean, it's a crazy idea. So what the Germans ought to do is back off. They perhaps are now too dug in to simply admit to what you said, which is clearly that this is an intelligence operation. And they're probably too dug in also to do what common sense and the Russians say they should do, which is share with the Russians the information they claim to have about a crime which was supposedly carried out against a Russian citizen in Russia. I mean, bear in mind, how are the Russians supposed to investigate a crime against someone in Russia if they're not provided the evidence of it? I mean, it's a crazy idea.
And the person's in Germany.
And the person's in Germany, exactly. I mean, the Russians have said, let's talk to the German doctors. Let's have our two doctors, sets of doctors, the Russian doctors and the German doctors meet and compare notes. Putin, by the way, said that to Macron just yesterday. There was because he refuses to speak to Merkel at the moment. He says that he's not going to talk. He's not going to talk to Merkel until the Germans provide this information. So Merkel did the usual thing. She got firstly Giuseppe Conte of Italy to speak to Putin, and Conte said, "Well, Putin has committed to setting up a commission of inquiry." And Putin through his spokesman came back and said, "I agreed to no such thing." And then she got Macron to call Putin. And the Kremlin readout suggests that Macron came away with an earful and that Putin didn't concede anything. So, unless they're prepared unless they're prepared to do the entirely sensible and common sense thing, share the information with the Russians about a crime which was supposedly committed against a Russian citizen in Russia, they're not prepared to do that, then, and I don't approve of this, I think it's immoral and unethical and wrong, but as a damage limitation exercise, they should go away, talk to the Europeans, come up with a few token sanctions against a few Russian police officials or whatever it is, and leave it at that, because ultimately there's nothing further to be gained about this. The problem is, having clambered onto this high horse, they're finding it, I think, extremely difficult to find a way of getting off, because I think that they made the mistake of thinking that the Russians were so desperate to have Nord Stream 2 that they would happily agree to hold all kinds of investigations, and it would all be carried out basically with the Germans running the investigations by remote control from Berlin, as if the Russians would ever agree to something like that. But, I think that was what they expected. And now they're rather shocked and stunned and bewildered about what to do when the Russians have called their bluff.
But the Russians, when have the Russians ever done this in the last 7? I'm watching the Russians. I've been watching Putin like day in and day out since 2013. And I haven't seen that guy give somebody anything that they didn't deserve.
No.
One moment. He won't give them an inch on Ukraine. He's going to give them an inch on Alexei Navalny just so that Merkel can save face because she made the mistake of trying to sweet talk Donald Trump to at a time when he was putting pressure on her. Notice what happens with Merkel whenever her poll numbers are up. she becomes she becomes incredibly strong, and she does things, and she overplays her hand left and right whenever her poll numbers are up. And the minute her poll numbers are off, slip at all, then she starts, oh, I didn't mean it. Because, look, I mean, her poll numbers were up last month. We then heard exactly what she thought about things. I don't believe I made a mistake about the refugee crisis. She can actually say what she believed when she was polling 38%, and she had, quote unquote, broken the back of AFD, or frankly, AFD broke the back of themselves. Yeah. So, like, I look at this and I'm like, you really don't have any sense of. She has no sense of the bigger picture. No. When she when she has popular support, she thinks she can press her advantage, and when she doesn't know what to do, and she flounders. Now, here's the interesting part about Merkel, and this is the thing that I want to put in your head before we leave, because we're coming up on an hour, and I think that's about right in terms of time, which is the following. Merkel is going to leave next year. Yes. She has no. Yeah, I guess I watched your video with Alex the other day saying, well, so now she's trying to position herself for a job afterwards, like Gerhard Schroeder left and then became the head of, Nordstream 2 effectively. Yes. Right. Yes. So that's the main reason why Nordstream 2 is not going to stop, because Gerhard Schroeder is shepherding the thing through on behalf of German business. And the German businesses are the things that are the wealth of the CDU's power. Right. Yes. And Merkel's power. But at the same time, Merkel doesn't operate for herself. And therefore, there is a distinct possibility. I'm not saying this is real. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but it's like everything else. You put odds on things. That Merkel is willing to burn as many things down as possible to get what her masters want done before she leaves office, i.e. fiscal integration and the betrayal of the Germans. She's already got check. We've got that done. Do we have to stop Nord Stream 2? Because again, at the end of the day, these people are operating under the assumption that they're going to destroy the United States, they're going to destroy the UK, and they're trying to blackmail the Russians and the Chinese into knuckling under and consolidate world power under the auspice of the EU, under the auspice again of their Great Reset and the planned socio and economic destruction of the Western economy and societal fabric. And that's what they're doing right now. And I see a coin flip here as to whether or not Merkel is going to just burn everything down and leave office as the most hated chancellor in German history. But she'll have done so much damage on her way out the door that it won't matter. Well, I think I won't put that idea in your head. I'm not saying it's real. I'm just going to put that idea in your head as a discussion point.
It would not surprise me. I mean, she is a much more cynical and, dare I say, ruthless individual than people, I think, they understand. I mean, she projects this image of this slightly bumbling, but deeply moral and ethical and straightforward, Schwabian Hausfrau, and she's in reality nothing like that. She is a deeply Machiavellian figure. By the way, she is what we said about the politicians in Britain and America of these sort of centre-left parties, the way that they basically stop doing politics, that they do intrigue and plotting and that kind of thing. She takes that to an extreme in Germany. She is perhaps, alongside Obama, the prime example of that style of politics. She's able to do it because, of course, German history means that a more conventional form of politics, of people going out and campaigning and speaking to people, is looked still amongst many Germans with a certain wariness because of history and of what happened in the 20s and 30s and all that. So she's been able to take this even further in some ways in Germany than, say, Obama was ever able to do in the United States. And she's not had, because of this cultural issue in Germany, the kind of pushback that we see now developing in Britain and the United States with people like Johnson and with people like Trump. So I would not be at all surprised if she says to herself, well, après-moi le déluge, after me the flood. And if she actually talks about the flood and says, well, let's bring it on a bit and find ways of doing it, because that's basically what my friends in Davos and elsewhere would like me to do. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it's also my little revenge on Germany, this country which I've led for such a long time, but which fundamentally and deep down I really despise, because my loyalties are elsewhere. So I would,
very obvious.
Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised about this. I'm not sure, because one of the other things about Merkel is that, again, very much like Barack Obama, she operates in great secrecy. Just as Obama did all sorts of terrible things when he was president and always managed to stay in the shadows, Merkel is to an even greater extent the same. And just as Obama was terrible at everything except managing the media and public relations, so Merkel is also the same in Germany. She has a tremendous support in the media, which completely looks the other way at all of the accumulating problems she is creating. Now, if she mishandles the Navalny affair and it ends up as bad for Germany, it will be the culmination of a disastrous period of Merkel's rule. I mean, she has presided over immobility and stagnation in the heart of Germany. Mm-hmm. That is difficult unless you visit Germany to appreciate how debilitating and demoralizing it has been. If she mishandles the Navalny affair, or whether she perhaps does so intentionally and leaves a bad legacy in her on top of that, then we need to understand that it would be on top of that. It would be the climax of a succession of bad decisions that she's been making ever since she became Chancellor. And I'm going to finish one last thing, which is that she has her great nemesis has always been Vladimir Putin, a completely different type of leader. I mean, they're both called conservatives, but they're not the same sort of conservative at all. She's never understood Putin. She's always misjudged completely both Putin and the way that Russia works. She sells herself as someone who understands the Russians because she speaks Russian, and she doesn't really understand them at all. She has consistently got them wrong. Apparently back in 2014, at the time of the Ukrainian crisis, she was telling everybody that within 6 months after the sectoral sanctions were imposed, Putin would either back down on Ukraine and hand Crimea back, or the oligarchs would move to overthrow him, because there would be such a huge crisis there and the oligarchs wouldn't like to lose all their money in the West. She got that completely wrong, but she still does. Because, again, very much like Obama and the people around him, she not only doesn't like Russia and Putin, she actually actively despises them. And she doesn't really understand them. So these people don't understand their own countries, and they don't understand the country, Russia, which they have made into their adversary. And that's why they continuously miscalculate around this. I think the Navalny affair is going to be a very revealing one. It's going to show what the balance of forces in Germany is, and it will also show how much more damage Merkel can do whilst she remains Chancellor. We will see. What I will predict is that even though the AfD has got itself into a mess, a reaction in Germany at some point is certain to come.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the key. And I remember writing an article about 2 years ago saying they really need to shift from the anti-Merkel party to the we can fix Germany party. And they never made that shift rhetorically. And because they never did that, they never crossed the 16% gap. And once you fail to make that move, and the Greens did, I'm like, oh, well, German politics is now uninteresting until 2021, and I just like put it on the back burner because their leadership is inept, and then you have to ask yourself, oh, did they learn how to run a party from the libertarians here in the United States? Because these people are not sharp politically. So
completely true.
Yeah, and that's sad, and because there's a real opportunity here for them to help remake Germany. But you're right, and that. The alternative for Germany will have an opportunity in the 2021 elections, depending on what Merkel does between now and then. But if she burns the house down, expect the CDU to get crushed at the next election. She may actually want that, hoping that the Greens will then take that somehow, like the Greens and the SPD will somehow cobble a coalition together. The Greens, the SPDs, and FDP or whatever. They'll be able to, or Die Linke.
The talk at the moment in Germany is precisely that the SPD is aiming for a coalition with the Greens, the FDP, and, believe it or not, Die Linke, which is extraordinary.
Right. So you have all four. You have cartelized. You have a cartelized government. You shut out the CDU and the AfD. You destroy the quote unquote right. In Germany, and then you just sell it all out to the EU, and she's already packaged it all up. The Bundesbank doesn't have any other options because the ECB's balance sheet is something that they have to backstop. Is a point that Ira Harris made to me multiple times over the course of a couple of podcasts we've done together. He's absolutely correct about this. So I don't see Germany survive in the current form. I don't see Germany surviving this. I see Macron just licking his chops at this point, watching. And I also feel that at a certain level, this may all just be a pantomime. This is exactly what they want. And that's part of the reason why Macron is very happy to have a no-deal Brexit, because he knows how much damage it'll actually do to Germany. Now, at the same time, everybody wants Nord Stream 2 because they're all committed to this green energy thing. And they need the Russian gas coming in. And the wild card here is Donald Trump and the State Department at the United States. And I'm sure that British intelligence has a hand in this as well, silently, or at least not so silently. But all of this is very interesting. The one thing we didn't get to that I would have liked to have covered, but I'm going to cut it off here, is Boris Johnson's going after the BBC. So maybe the next time you and I talk about this, I really want to talk about that. Because as one of my patrons described it to me, it's like the BBC is like Disney Plus, ABC, NBC, and CNN all rolled into one, and the university system like all rolled into one, and Johnson going after it, I think, is a very important thing. But we'll hold that for another day. Alexander, this has been Alexander, this has been an absolute joy. I've enjoyed it as always. We'll revert on doing one of these again in the near future, and we'll go from there. So, if you got any last words before we go out the door, then
let's definitely talk about the BBC, because you're absolutely right. It fulfills a role in British life that no other news or media organization or institution anywhere in the world does. So Boris Johnson going after it is a fascinating topic, and absolutely one that needs to be talked about.
Yep. So if you and I don't talk about it, you and Alex can go ahead and talk about it, and I'll listen.
We will certainly talk about it, Tom, because we're going to do more programs together of this kind. Yeah. They're always a huge pleasure to do. And I always look forward to doing them, and I look forward to discussing the BBC with you very soon, because it's a fascinating subject.
All right. Well, I'll leave it there then. So thank you, Alex, for your time and your attention, and the good work that you guys do over at Duran. It's invaluable, I think, to people.
And your work is also invaluable, Tom, and I've learned huge amounts from you all the time.
I appreciate that. So, all right, I'm going to leave it there. So you guys have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Be well. Well, that wraps it up for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed the talk between myself and Alex. We will be back next Tuesday with hopefully another interview if everything goes well, as I talked about at the beginning of the show today. As always, you can follow my work over at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728, as well as support the podcast and myself on Patreon at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns. You guys take care. You have a great week. We will talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.